Good evening. Welcome back. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Dave Schrader, along with me, Tim Dennis. Fascinating first hour. We talked with our guest, David Paulides, about the late-breaking news that DNA may actually prove the existence of Bigfoot. CNN reported on it a little bit earlier, of course, doing it tongue-in-cheek and totally dismissing the science behind it, which is disheartening, to say the least.
I'd say more than disheartening. I mean, it's borderline almost laughable.
You know, it would be interesting to call these people on it if and when this comes out and the news breaks and it's legitimately science and in there, you know, to call upon that. Because, you know, it'd be like me coming on and going, they say John Kennedy was assassinated today. The believers think it was, just totally dismissing it in the first newscast where you have absolutely no information to back up or substantiate your rudeness to this. You know, I understand, like David mentioned at the beginning of the hour, he said, unfortunately, mainstream media, you know, there's been so many other hoaxes and frauds. A lot of them are afraid to jump on the bandwagon to report something as a real factual news story because they've been burned too. I mean, that news story a couple of years ago with that fake Bigfoot in the ice chest, that really garnered a lot of it worldwide attention.
You can always go forward and report it as if, could this be the truth? Could this be, you know, could this be a real story? You can always report the hoax afterwards if there's a hoax. But as a journalist, to go ahead and just kind of throw cold water on it right away suggests that if you do end up stepping in it, so to speak, you're going to look bad. And that particular anchor, in my opinion, is going to look bad if this particular story pans out.
It probably doesn't matter to them at all, does it?
No.
Unfortunate. Our guest is David Paulides, and he received his undergraduate and graduate degrees from the University of San Francisco and has a professional background that includes 20 years in law enforcement, 3.5 years at the Fremont Police, and 16.5 years at the San Jose Police Department. He released a book in March of 2012. His third book, his first book in the series, Missing 411, Western U.S., the story of people who have disappeared in the wilds of North America. And then in late March 2012, his fourth book, Missing 411, Eastern U.S., the Eastern version, is a continuation of stories which occurred in the eastern half of the United States with special sections on unusual outdoor activities which seem to be related to disappearances and a master list of all the people who have vanished. This is... David, when we talk on the show, it's a pleasure to have you here for the second hour. First of all, let me say thank you for hanging in with us.
No problem, guys. I'm here.
Great. Now let's talk a little bit about these books. I mean, it was intriguing to me when this was brought up. You're taking a look at these cases where remote areas, well documented, that hundreds of people are vanishing, unexplained disappearances in isolated areas. And with no real answer, no idea what's going on here. What inspired you to start looking into this kind of book and research not one, but getting two books out?
Yeah, I should preface that for the people who haven't read the books, there's a lot of people who like to make comments and knee-jerk reactions to the topic and the substance. These stories do not have answers, and there are no easy answers. And if there were easy answers, the stories were excluded. These aren't possible drownings. These aren't runaways. These aren't people who wanted to fall out of society. These are true whodunits. And we went to great effort to ensure that they fit a narrow set of criteria. Personally, I was at a national park. I was doing some peripheral research. I was talking to a group of employees. These are subcontractors that work in the park. For people who don't know, the concession stands, the restaurants, et cetera, inside national parks are not run by the national park. They contract that out to private individuals and businesses. And it's those people inside the national park that will talk to you. The national park employees usually won't. So I was inside talking to them. At the end of the day, I left. I was staying outside the park at a location. You get one of those knocks on the door in the middle of the night, and individuals walked in. They said, "Hey, we're employees of the national park. We know who you are. We recognize your work. You've written 2 outstanding books. You're a serious researcher. We got something you need to look into." And they tell a story where every 8 or 9 years, usually at the max, the national park employee usually moves. And during the course of a career, they're usually at 3 or 4 different locations. These people talked about a series of disappearances at each park that they've worked at. that were unexplained. And what concerned them the most was that once the person disappeared, there was a lot of publicity. You know, there was 1 week where maybe every other day there's something in the news about these people. And then all of a sudden, there's nothing. And there's no follow-up. And they're like gone, and the National Park Service flushes it. And they said that there were too many people at some locations to make good sense that this was happening. And again, they prefaced it and said, no, these aren't runaways. These aren't people that drowned. These aren't people that fell in creeks. These are people that really vanished. And they said, you really need to look into it, Dave. And they said, hey, just don't give it a peripheral look. Really give it a hard look. So I said, I promise I will. And the next morning I left and I called a couple of law enforcement sources and I said, hey, check and see if there's disappearances at these locations and see if the numbers add up. And they called back right away and they go, oh my gosh, there's a ton of them. I said, So I came home, and for the people who don't know, the National Park Service has a contingent of federally trained law enforcement officers. These people go to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. They get outstanding training. They go back for retraining on a regular basis. These aren't the guys that pick up garbage. These aren't the guys that clean campsites. These are strictly law enforcement officers. They have detectives that are called special agents that follow up on the crime. And these people are excellent law enforcement officers inside of national parks and monuments. There's 189 locations that they patrol, and they're in charge of. So when I came home, knowing that this is a big contingent of law enforcement officers, all federally trained, better trained than most small police departments across the U.S., I filed a Freedom of Information Act request against the National Park Service for a list of missing people inside their system. Now, if you and I walked into any medium or large police department in the U.S., even before we got there, if we looked at the website, there'd probably be a list of missing people on the department's website. If we walked in, and if we were, say, an administrator for a city or the sheriff's office in that county, and we walked into the sheriff's office and said, hey, could you give us a list of the missing people in our city or in our county? Within an hour, that administrator no doubt would have that list. And their database is online, and it's a federal mandate that any child that disappears in North America has to be placed on the missing child database that's monitored and legislated by the government. So I filed this FOIA against the Park Service. Simultaneously, I filed one for Yosemite as well because I wanted a list of people from there. We knew there were a lot of people missing there. So within about 2 months, I get a letter back from an attorney from the Park Service, and that is unusual in itself. And the attorney stated that they don't keep track of missing people. They have no lists of missing people. And they would have to make a list up from scratch. And if I wanted one, or my organization wanted one from the entire system, it would cost us $1.4 million.
Wow.
And if we just wanted one from Yosemite, it would cost us $34,000.
That seems insane. How can that be possible?
So there's a lot of law enforcement guys I work with, and when I showed this to them, they said that is literally impossible. That is absolutely an abolishment to your career and what you need to do as a law enforcement administrator. This has to be a specific act, a specific decision to withhold the information and not track missing people. Can you imagine if a big TV show like America's Most Wanted looked into missing people and they came into the Park Service and they said, no, we don't track missing people? That'd be political suicide.
Yeah, no doubt.
So, according to the Freedom of Information Act, if you're a published author, you can ask for an exemption on costs. I asked for an exemption because I had 2 books published.
Sure.
Even though they're not related to the topic I was pursuing,
right.
I'm still a published author. And the same attorney got back to me 2 months later and said, well, we did a search, and your books aren't in enough libraries to qualify for the exemption. Again, that is nowhere in FOIA or nowhere in any legislation anywhere associated with FOIA. And when I asked him how many libraries I needed to be in, they didn't answer.
Well, and how would they know? I mean, they could do how frightening is this that they can do a scan and know how many libraries you're in, but they can't keep track of how many people are missing in their state park or national park?
Excellent point, Dave. Exactly.
They have that kind of technology and information available to them. That's strange. Wow.
So from that point, we got pretty upset. And we actually felt that it was a concerted act to withhold the information. Because if you remember, we have Park Service employees telling us something's up. And then we get a response like that to missing people.
Right.
Doesn't seem normal, and it doesn't seem correct.
Not at all.
Several months later, I get a call from the head of the National Park Service Police. And they asked me to have a conference call with him and his number 2 guy in charge. So I figure, this ought to be good. So we have the call. And one of the questions I had asked previously was, how many members do they have on their department? And they didn't want to tell me. And then I asked why they were withholding this information. The response I got is that they were in the process, this was 3 or 4 years ago now, they were in the process of implanting a large computer system to track data like this, but right now they didn't have the wherewithal to do it. And I said, guys, excuse me for a second, but if I gave you $5 for 189 locations, $2 for a clipboard, and the extra $3 for 40 pages of graph paper, and I told you to nail it on the wall in each one of these 189 locations, and I wanted you, every time somebody went missing, to write the name, the date, the time, and the location. That's all you need to track missing people. And if you have someone with a laptop, any Excel spreadsheet would be outstanding to track that information. They said nothing.
Wow, that's terrifying. Let's start getting into the deeper cavities of this then. As somebody coming from a law enforcement background as yourself, and understanding that this just is not possible, nor should it be allowable, do you believe that this is just a cover up, like the famous Disney stories? Nobody dies at Disney, whether your head was removed on the log flume or not. They will tie it back on until they get you across the street and then pronounce you dead. Is it that it's just bad PR for people to know how many people have been gone missing there, or do you think there's something more nefarious going on?
Well, after doing 3+, going on 4.5 now years of research, I say that something is definitely uniquely wrong. And these people are smart individuals that run these organizations. And in talking to dozens of law enforcement friends that run other organizations, they said, it's impossible. We would never do that. It's not a big deal to keep track of this information. As an example, I got into this, and I was doing one of the big radio shows maybe a year ago about this, and I got an email that night from somebody that said, well, maybe the reason they're not keeping track of this is because they know that there's a couple of serial killers inside the Park Service. Now, there's a statement I never thought of a fact like that, and I don't think they're that nefarious. I don't actually believe they think there's a killer inside their system and they're trying to hide it. I don't believe that. I don't think that people that are police officers have that in their system. But I do believe that they understand that there's a problem that they probably can't control, and they don't want to affect tourism. And I think they understand that the numbers don't add up. And if the numbers got out to the public, I don't think it would do them much good.
Well, as you started doing the research on this and these stories are coming to light, did you find any kind of common thread between the missing? Or is it male, female, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, Well,
one of the first things we did is I went out to a library right near Yosemite, and I just started spending days and days digging through the archives and newspapers. And one of the first stories I ever came across was in a town right next to where I lived in Saratoga, California, on July 17th, 1981, a 14-year-old girl named Stacy Harris disappeared inside Yosemite. She was with her dad and a group of 8 other people that were on horseback and taking a packed trip into a remote area of Yosemite, very remote. And they worked their way in, and in this one little camp area, there's a series of cabins. It's called Sunrise High Sierra Camps. And they got off their horses. Quite a few people went into their cabins. Stacy went in, freshened up, came back out with her camera. One of the men that was on the trip was a 71-year-old man that Stacy had talked to, and they walked 100 feet down this trail in full view of everybody, and they were probably at 9,000 feet. They were high up. And the man said, I'm going to sit down. And he sat down in front of everybody. Stacy told the man that she was going to walk down the granite into this small valley a couple hundred feet away where there was a lake that was surrounded by heavy trees. And she said, I'm going to go down there and take some pictures. The man said, okay. And again, everybody sees this occurring. Stacy walks over the knoll. The man sees her walks over the knoll. She's never seen again. A massive search goes on for weeks. And one of her uncles who participated in the search, I talked to him, and he said, Dave, it was massive. The only thing they ever found of her was a lens cap to her camera right at the point where you entered the tree line, and it was laying in the middle of the trail. Now, I've done dozens and dozens of Freedom of Information Act requests on missing people inside the National Park Service. And on that point specifically, I've never been refused to get the case file on a missing person. National Park Service in Yosemite refused to give me that case file. It had been over 30 years that case had occurred. Nobody had looked at the case in 10 years. There are no suspects, and it is classified as a missing persons case. The special agent that was holding that case called me and said, why do you want that case? He says, well, according to FOIA and the law, it's irrelevant, and you can't ask that question. And he says, well, you're never going to get it. I said, now, why would you say that? He goes, you'll never get this case. And I appealed that decision through my congressman, and I still did not get that case. And in speaking to her uncle and her cousins, Stacy, according to them, has never been found. She's still a missing person, and it's a complete mystery why the Park Service refuses to give the case. And to the best of my knowledge, it doesn't qualify as a refusal because it's not a criminal investigation.
Now, as somebody who's got a law enforcement background, I know there's this kind of brotherhood of the, thin blue line. Going in there and them knowing that you're an ex-officer, that hasn't helped you much in the way of getting somebody to, tip their hat and explain a little bit deeper into these subjects of why they think this is going on or what's going down in those areas?
Well, and that's why this was completely astounding. It was a very confrontational communication between myself and this special agent. And in the middle of the conversation, I said the exact same thing. I said, hey, I'm not your foe. I'm your friend. I'm a retired officer. I'm not here to do anything against you. I just want to write about this story. You're never going to get the story. That's what he said.
Huh.
And I've talked about this case incessantly over the years, and it's bothered me immensely. And I have no idea, and I have no understanding of how they can refuse that either. But I'll move on to other things. Inside of Yosemite as well, I talk about the historical aspect in all of our investigations, and we did do a historical review of Yosemite. On July 20th, 1954, a guy named Walter Gordon, a 26-year-old graduate student from the University of California at Berkeley, had a summer job working in the valley. He told some friends that he was going to take a short hike to Glacier Point and he'd be back in a couple hours. He never came back. 3 months later, on October 9th, 1954, Orver von Loss went with his family to the base of Yosemite. He was also a graduate student from the University of California at Berkeley. He told his family he was going to take a short walk. He'd be right back. He never came back. The families found each other about 2 months later. The boys didn't know each other. They were in different programs. They were 4 years apart in age. Both went to Cal, both in the grad program there. The families got together and started to put together how similar the facts were in these disappearances. And they both wrote a letter together to Eisenhower. And in that letter, they asked for special, this is the quote, special warfare troops to come to the park because nothing in the disappearance of their kids pointed to a voluntary disappearance, and they wanted the troops to come in and look for them because they thought that their kids were abducted. Now, therein lies a common theme in what I write about. When people disappear, it's not that often that a family thinks that they're abducted, especially in a wilderness area. People disappear all the time. Most of the families think, oh, they got lost, they got hurt. But in the cases I write about, probably 80% of the time, the family thinks that an abduction occurs. And clearly, these two families got together, wrote a distinct letter asking for help, and were refused. And I think that refusal, in and of itself, says a lot. And since that time in 1954, there have been many, many other people disappear in Yosemite under equally baffling conditions. Yosemite is the number one cluster that I write about in my books for the most disappearances.
Well, David, I can't remember the parks off the top of my head that this story came from, and it was probably going on about 10 years ago, and maybe you can enlighten me if this sounds familiar. But there was a case of a woman, she was out with her boyfriend, and they were jogging through one of the national parks, and she stopped to tie her shoe. He jogged on a little. She said, oh, don't worry, I'll catch up with you. He jogged on a little bit, realized she wasn't behind him. He ran back, no sign of her, nothing. He didn't hear a sound. And what they ended up finding out was that a mountain lion, when she'd crouched down for her shoe, they guessed that that's when he ran. The mountain lion came through, caught her by the throat, crushed the windpipe so she couldn't make a noise, dragged her off, and was dining on her, you know. And as you said in the last hour, we were talking about how you could leave a deer carcass out in the woods and how quickly it disintegrates from, you know, the local animals eating it to just the way the body breaks down and the ground absorbs it, and all of that takes place. Is there a chance that there are things just, you know, it's just mountain lions, stealthy animals that are doing this and snagging the people and doing it quickly, and there's no nefarious deal going on other than just really hungry national park animals?
And that's a great question. And part of our screening is to ensure that those cases would be eliminated. Searchers, professional searchers, I talked this last June at Harvey's in Lake Tahoe to the National Association of Search and Rescue People. Somebody in the upper administration of Search and Rescue read my books and wanted me to talk about it. It was a packed house, millions of questions. And the search and rescue people know what to look for on these things. They bring in professional trackers to look for the markings of an animal. They look for hair. They look for blood. Special canines come in that are tracking animals in that area. Sometimes they come in and they're special tracking for corpses rather than a live body. So all of those have been eliminated. If there was ever an inkling that it was an animal kill or something along those lines that they could identify, it was eliminated.
All right. Now, could you explain to me, too, just for the skeptic side of the audience and myself as well, I understand where you're coming from and that there are trackers that do this and are adept at it and know what they're looking for. But, part of the big question, as we talked about in the first hour with Bigfoot, is, there's not, why aren't we finding more prevalent footprints? Why aren't we? Because they're not always standing in a mucky, miry area, and if a mountain lion comes through that area and grabs its prey and moves off quick, it may not leave much of a print because it's hauling ass through there and, may not hit a wet spot or a mud patch or something that would leave a track behind. I'm just curious where, out of the cases that you looked into, how many from the thousands of disappeared, people would you end up saying would definitely be animal attacks, and that, were they all found, or was it just assumed, nope, this is probably an animal attack? We found a trail of blood here. We found this, that, and the other.
Well, the other thing that Search and Rescue does on almost every case is they bring in canines to search.
Uh-huh.
So they give the scent to the dog follows the scent. If, in this instance, a woman was attacked by a mountain lion and drug away, the canine would follow the scent to the body. So in the instances in these books, many, many times the dog walks in circles, the dog lays down and doesn't want to track, the canine is essentially useless in almost every one of these cases, which is part of the unusual criteria that exists here.
Our guest is David Paulides. We're speaking with him. First hour, we were talking about his work in the field of Bigfoot research. This hour, we're speaking about his books, Missing 411, Western United States and Canada, Unexplained Disappearances of North Americans That Have Never Been Solved. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we've got more with our guest, David Paulides. This is the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Darkness Radio. Good evening. Welcome back to the show. This is the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Darkness Radio, your home for the best in supernatural news and stories every week from 10 p.m. until midnight. You can find us here. I want to let our listeners know that we are returning to Romania this year. We're going to be going to Dracula's Castle. That's right, on the trail of Vlad the Impaler. If you would like to join us on this trip, Jeff Belanger from 30 Odd Minutes, Ghost Village, and the lead writer of Ghost Adventures TV series, and myself, Dave Schrader from Darkness Radio, we're going to be heading out to Romania, Transylvania. We're going to go along and see some of the most beautiful and historic locations and follow in the footsteps of Vlad Tepes, the original Dracula. We'll include his castle where he was actually imprisoned for a number of years, where we get to investigate that night for a few hours. We'll also have an opportunity to see his final resting place, or is it? And even more, just an amazing opportunity, and was the trip of a lifetime. I loved it so much last year. I immediately booked for another trip to bring out our friends and listeners. Only 30 people can attend. We have 6 spots left open. If you are interested, email me at dave@darknessradio.com. Again, dave@darknessradio.com. We will get you the information, get you signed up. Between $2,800 to $3,200 for 8 days and nights in Romania. It's an amazing opportunity you're not going to want to miss. Honestly, I still, one of the fondest memories of my life. Hope that you'll join us out there. Our guest this evening is David Paulides, and we're speaking with him. Spent the first hour speaking about Bigfoot. He has a book called The Hoopa Project, Bigfoot Encounters in California, and Tribal Bigfoot, his second book. His books that we're speaking about in the second hour, Missing 411, Western United States and Canada, Unexplained Disappearances of North Americans That Have Never Been Solved, and Missing 411, Eastern United States, Unexplained Disappearances of North Americans That Have Never Been Solved. Both books are out and about. Can they find them on your website? Where's a good place? Because at Amazon, you are sold out, Captain. What do we do to get people copies of your books?
Go to canammissing.com, C-A-N, like Canadian, can-am, missing.com, and they are there.
All right, fantastic. So check that out. Interesting stuff. Let me ask you, I mean, coming at it from this angle, we hear about alien abductions all the time, people that they believe are just being snatched up and taken away for testing. We hear about these Bigfoot encounters. And talking in the first hour, you were saying that there are Native American tribes that they believe coexist with these, and that they're not animal, they're more human than animal in nature of the Bigfoot. But there are some factions that are very aggressive and unhappy. Could there be a chance that it's one of these Sasquatch groups that could be abducting people that they feel are a threat in their area, which may disturb the animals that are out during the hunt and the search and rescue, and why they can't find it? What do you make on theories and ideas like that?
From the very get-go, the guys and myself that worked on this project had agreed that we would not make statements about what we thought what was occurring here.
Okay.
And part of that has to do with mere respect that a majority of these stories aren't in any databases. The families aren't getting any publicity. The kids aren't getting recognized that they're gone. And a lot of people don't really even care what my opinion is. I'd rather have the publicity about the missing people and let people come to their own decisions about what really happened. And on top of that, I must say that in the 8 months, 9 months that these books have been out, that I've probably been given 10 or more ultra quality opinions about what could be occurring. So, truthfully, I have no positive thoughts about absolutely what's happening, because I've been written to by UFO experts, Bigfoot experts, and every other cryptid expert you can imagine, saying, Dave, you solved the puzzle. This is what's happening here. And then a 10-page long email diatribe about how it happened.
Well, the policeman in you and the want to resolve and solve a case like this has got to get to you. I mean, are there theories? I know you said nobody wants to know your theories. I disagree. I think there's a lot of people listening tonight that would like to hear some of the ideas that you think may be responsible for these type of disappearances. There's got to be some resolution to the story for you, or idea behind what's going on. I mean, where do you fall in on that, at least?
I will give this thought, that one of the smartest guys I know was the head of a law enforcement agency for many years, and he read my books. And he's probably one of the best investigators I've ever known in my life. And he said, Dave, do you have any thoughts on what's going on here? And I said, well, maybe at the beginning I did, but I'm so perplexed at this point because of the quality statements people have given me. I'm not 100% sure anymore. He says, well, let me give you my opinion. He says the National Park Service doesn't want to keep track of it. The National Park Service doesn't even want to talk about it. And you have instances in your books where two boys disappeared. Dennis Martin, in 1964, he was 7 years old, disappeared from Great Smoky Mountain National Park. And Douglas Legg disappeared in July of 71. He was 8 years old, and he disappeared in the Adirondacks of northern New York. Both of these kids disappeared nearly in the presence of family members, never were found. And ironically, in both of those cases, the only two cases I know about anywhere in the world, the Green Berets were called to search for these boys. And in 1964, in the National Park Service, the Rangers didn't carry guns. But the Green Berets showed up with guns. And they showed up and they set up their own camp away from everybody else, and they searched by themselves. They didn't ask for Park Service help. Since the Park Service guys kind of knew the park like the back of their hand, you'd think they'd ask, but they didn't. People would ask how I know that. Well, the head tracker for the Park Service, who retired, Dwight McCarter, I interviewed him extensively about the disappearances inside that park. And he's the one that told me this, so he would know. And he says it was pretty unusual seeing these guys. So the same sort of situation happened in New York when Douglas disappeared. So in many of the shows I've gone on, I've always asked, if anybody knows a Green Beret, ask them what happened here. Why were they there? What was their mission? Because I filed 3 different Freedom of Information Act requests with the Army asking for the orders and the associated paperwork for these missions. And not only was I refused, they wouldn't even acknowledge I submitted 3 different requests. That's why I know I'll never get any information from that. But subsequent to my on-air interviews, in the last 3 months, I've been contacted by 3 different families from Green Berets. All 3 of them said the exact same thing. Green Berets do not search for missing kids. And that was all they said. They said my dad or my uncle or my cousin, he had to sign a secrecy oath. He lives by that, but he did say they would never search for a missing kid.
Wow. I mean, that just lets the mind go wild on what the hell was out there and what's going on in this area. Has there been any research or, I know that they've done some of the searches using, what's the word I'm looking for? The thermal cameras, trying to seek, and they've actually helped to find some missing children out in the woods that have gotten lost during, Boy Scout encampments and things like that. And those kids seem to vanish and end up being just fine, but it's because of that luck and being able to find them that draws them, the attention that they get.
Yeah, FLIR, forward-looking infrared radar, is absolutely useless in these cases. And in the instances where FLIR was utilized and kids were eventually found, they were found in places where FLIR would never work. They were found sleeping under a rock ledge. They were found sleeping under a log, or they were found deceased under those locations. So, but in the instance, in 99% of the time where the people weren't found, FLIR was useless. They never found anything.
We're going to take our final break. Let me ask, out of the missing people cases, have there ever been bodies that were recovered and they couldn't find a natural cause? I mean, I shouldn't say natural cause, an unnatural cause of their death. You know, it wasn't like they fell off a cliff or anything. They just found the body and they were deceased, and there's no understanding or realization of why these people have passed away this way.
The cause, 90% of the time, is exposure. It could be in the middle of summer.
Okay.
Of exposure. It's like the blanket statement when people don't really know why someone died, or there's so few remains found, to protect themselves, they'll say exposure.
Okay. Huh. Intriguing stuff. David Paulides is our guest. You can check out, what is the website again? People can find the copy of the book.
CAN-AM, C-A-N as in Nora, A-M as in Mary, CanAmMissing.com.
And if you have any questions for our guest regarding the first hour interview with Bigfoot and his research in the field, or questions regarding the missing person cases, you can give us a call at 651-989-5855, 651-989-5855. Stay tuned. More of the best in Paranormal Talk Radio coming your way right after this. Welcome back to the show. This is the best in Paranormal Talk Radio. This is Darkness Radio. I'm your host, Dave Schrader. Along with me, Tim Dennis, our guest this evening, David Paulides. We're speaking about his book series. And again, if you're a Bigfoot fan and want more information, he's written two great books. One called The Hoopa Project, Bigfoot Encounters in California. Second book, Tribal Bigfoot. Both books are out and about and available. You can find his books that we're talking about in this hour, Missing 411 Western United States and Missing 411 Eastern United States, at CanAm, and I'm sorry, give it one more time, CanAm Missing.com, and find the copies of the books there. Tim, I'm sorry, you had a question for David.
Yeah,
go ahead.
You know, David, I gotta play devil's advocate here, and I apologize ahead of time, but it seems to me if you've got Green Berets out there looking for kids, and they're not supposed to be out there, and you see them out there with weapons, okay? You have reports of them out there with weapons. How do you not automatically come up to at least a hypothesis, as someone who's investigated, as someone who's studied these cases in depth? How do you not come up with a hypothesis? In your mind, don't you have an idea of what they're doing out there, in your opinion?
Well, again, I won't say an opinion, but I will tell you what other people have said to me, and they said it reminded them of the movie Predator.
Interesting. That's very interesting. Okay. So are we talking, in your realm, in your rationale, possibly alien abduction is what they're talking about?
No, they didn't mention aliens. They didn't mention anything. They just said, Dave, the description you kind of gave reminded us, we were sitting around listening in the dark, and kind of reminded us of the movie Predator, where there's these army guys in the woods and kind of working under spooky circumstances, and they're not talking to anybody else, and they're just communicating with themselves. Doesn't seem like it would be a normal search and rescue. Seems like they want to be alone.
Because in that case, you're describing either some sort of military action, police action, or it doesn't sound like a search and recovery type of mission. If you've got weapons drawn and they're not talking to anybody other than themselves.
And they're investigating, although they're not investigating a missing child. I mean, obviously, they're not worried that the child is out there Ramboing and getting ready to take each one of them down. So,
I mean, if they've got arms drawn, they're obviously going after something that's a threat.
Now, I never said they had arms drawn. I said they had weapons.
Well, even if they go in there with weapons, I mean, you know, if it's just a,
it's different than a normal search and rescue would be, right? I mean,
or even a civil search and rescue. A civil search and rescue, they may or may not have a sidearm on them. They may or may not have any type of weapon. if they're going in and expecting some sort of retaliation or some sort of pushback, then what kind of weapons were they carrying? Were these heavier weapons, or were they,
just
simple
a sidearm?
Well, the other point of this that I think is lost by many, and I think is lost in this conversation, is that every other search and rescue that you will ever research is done by the National Guard.
Mm-hmm.
It's local people from your community, the local National Guard post, that's called in to help in the search. Not the Green Berets.
No, and that's not lost on us at all. That's why we're pushing on this one. I mean, it's so intriguing that we're fully aware, here in Minnesota, people go missing, and it is the National Guard. It's the locals that go out and beat the bushes and poke things with sticks looking for, search and recovery or to try to find these bodies. That's why we're so intrigued by the fact that this case entailed Green Beret and a military force, not just, a bunch of retired Army guys going out and look at. I mean, you've got the Green Beret out there. These are the military elite. That's like sending the Navy SEALs out to go look for a kid at the local pool that's missing.
Well, and to kind of tie a poor example into it, if you want to bring Predator into the mix, we had a governor here, Jesse Ventura, who was in the movie Predator, who said when he was inaugurated here in Minnesota, he was taken to the basement of the state capitol. He was surrounded by CIA agents. And as he puts it, the CIA ain't supposed to be operating here in these borders in the U.S. So, and when asked, well, Governor, what did they want from you? He said they just wanted to know how I did it, how I got elected. And they wouldn't tell him why. And so to put one analogy with another, the CIA shows up at your door and you're the governor of Minnesota. Well, that's kind of suspect. And they just want to know how you did it. Well, if the Marines are out there looking for a small child, there's something else they're looking for.
Yeah. It's frightening stuff. Your book said
I think a lot of people have also told me, they said, Dave, well, you got to also remember that those guys from the community, those National Guard people, those people like you and me are just good, wholesome people. When they're done with the event, they're going to go home and they're going to tell people about it.
Mm-hmm.
But the Green Berets, they come from all parts of the country. They're not from our neighborhood. And when they leave, they're gone. And they have a secrecy oath they sign where they're never going to talk about it.
In the books, I mean, you've got two of them out there right now and talking about these cases. So do you just, you've got two full books. What are you detailing in these books? Are you talking just about giving the background about the person and who went missing? If you're not really giving theories on what happened to these people, what do the books cover?
Well, exactly what you stated. What happened, a little background about the person, how the incident evolved, what the response was by their families, and what the response was by the sheriffs or the searchers. What happens is that the reader, by the end of the second book, almost uniformly will write to me and say, Dave, there is an underlying parallel between all of these stories. And it's amazing. And again, if you haven't read the books, it's hard to explain it, but bad weather in accordance with the disappearance, unique qualities in the people who disappeared. Many of the people that I write about have a disability, and it's not a uniform disability, but it's a disability where they can't talk and they couldn't explain what happened to them. Or it's a disability where they are so inhibited in their ability to walk, how they got to the point where they were eventually found and where they were dead is beyond comprehension. Those kind of things. There's also, like I stated before, canines unable to find the people, canines refusing to search, and there's a uniform quality where there's water always in proximity in 90% of the instances where these people disappear. And again, if you haven't read it, it's hard to understand and grasp it, but once you read it, you'll get it. And I've asked a statistician, I've asked anybody who's a statistician to help me with this, because at the back of the book there's a list of 400 plus people, dates, times, etc., of when they disappeared, everybody I write about. The state of Pennsylvania, from the late 1930s to the early 1950s, has more children that disappear than anywhere else in the United States in any other time frame than you can imagine. What was going on in Pennsylvania during that time frame that all of these kids vanished? That's probably one of the most perplexing and disturbing facts in the Eastern book that people read about.
Well, I've got to say, relating a story, we talked in the first hour about Bigfoot, and I related my story to you. When I was, I think it was 1985, summer of 85, I went to Arkansas with a good friend of mine, Paul, and his family to visit his family out there. And at one point we went to Petit Jean Mountain, a big, beautiful national forest preserve area out there. And, you could take this trail down and go swimming where the waterfall is. And, we were a couple of strapping young bucks. We went down there swimming, and all of a sudden these storm clouds just rolled in. Most of the people started to head up when they saw the storm clouds. We didn't worry about it at first. And then by the time we decided to pack up and start heading our way back up the mountain, the rain was coming down in torrents. I mean, unbelievable amount of water coming down. I've never seen rain like that. So as we're booking our way back, there are signs at these national parks, David, were not real impressive. There were little arrows that were maybe 5-6 inches off the ground, pointing the direction you were supposed to follow. As we're running through this, mud is being splashed up onto these signs, and they bleed right in. You couldn't even see them. We ended up miles away from where we were supposed to be, trying to climb up the sheer face of a mountain to get up to the top. And it's deceiving. There are times when you're like, look at that. It's only like about 4 feet above us. We can get up there, and then we're up on and you try to climb there, and you just realize, oh my God, I've still got another 5-10 feet ahead of me. We kept finding ourselves in positions that were unbelievable. And at a few times during our afternoon there, we thought, we're never going to be found. We are so far off the beaten path now. We don't see any of the trailways. I hear no traffic. I hear no people. I don't know where we are. We're trying to climb over these brambles, and you would start to fall through these thickets of branches and things that were laying on the ground. And we'd be, chest high in this crap trying to climb our way through. So I could see in some of these national parks getting lost real easy. And especially if a big rain comes down and washes out the scent on a lot of these things, that being lost might not be so hard. Not that I'm questioning your book, but I mean, I can see, having survived it myself and being lost for, I think we were gone for almost 8 hours before we finally found a way back up to the top of the hill and caught a ride. We ended up about 5-6 miles totally away from where we had originally started and got driven back. So it's nefarious. It's certainly something to make you sit back and scratch your head. And with your stories, especially when they're calling in the Green Beret to start doing a search, then it definitely lets you think that there's something wonky going on out there. But on the other side of things, from the skeptic side, being lost out there myself and having no sense of direction, I get lost heading to the elevator sometimes on the way home tonight. I could see it being an easy loss out there and your body never turning up.
Well, again, I write a lot about young children that disappear.
Uh-huh.
Young kids can't travel far. They can't walk up steep cliffs.
Right.
And the inability for thousands of searchers to find a child that disappears is not normal.
I agree. David, thank you so much for joining us. David Paulides, you can find more information at nabigfootsearch.com, nabigfootsearch.com, or find more information about these books at canammissing.com. Thank you for tuning in. Mally and I will be back with you tomorrow night for supernatural news of the strange and bizarre. This is the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Darkness Radio.